Hello everyone, I'm Jordana Van of Raven Light Holistic Healing, and welcome to Swan as a Totem. Now I have two Swan videos, Swan as a Totem and Swan as a Spirit Guide, which I'll be uploading soon. This here is the video that you want if you feel that Swan is one of your personal guides in this lifetime, best evidenced by always having had some kind of interest in or frequent experiences with swans. If Swan is just suddenly showing up everywhere out of the blue, it's more likely a spirit guide. Depending on when you're watching this, the spirit guide video may already be out. You can search YouTube for the video, but you can also go to my website, www.ravenlightholistic.healing.com, which has a complete alphabetized library of all my videos, so it's really searchable. Before we get started, as of July 2021, I'm no longer seeing clients, new or returning, so that I can channel my full time and energy into creating a lot more new videos for you, and finally finishing some of the gazillion books I've been called to write. If you have been a client of mine, you'll want to visit my website, as I have posted some information just for you. Now, since seeing clients has constituted more than 90% of my income, which I have now released, if you enjoy my work, your support will be one of the things that will help me keep doing it. And you can provide that by becoming a channel member, which is as easy as clicking the join button next to the subscribe button. If you can't see the join button, which will be the case if you're using an Apple device or you're using an Android phone and accessing YouTube via your web browser and not the app, I've included a link in the video description to the page on my website where I provide quick, easy, device-specific instructions for making the join button visible. I know it sounds complicated, but I promise it really only takes a few seconds. So what do you get out of membership? Briefly, not only do channel members help me create more of the media that you enjoy, but there are a lot of different perks, from membership badges and exclusive emojis to the ability to vote for which video I'll make next. From now on, I'm only taking video requests from channel members at the second and third tier, since if these guys are going to be the reason I can afford to make more of these videos, they should be the ones receiving what they want most. So one way membership really pays off, for example, is with black swan and black-necked swan, if those are the ones in which you're interested. They're still swans, so they have plenty in common with their all-white cousins, but their unique coloration and habits also contribute some significant differences for the person for whom they are a totem. I simply did not have time to include all of these details in this video, so I made a separate black swan and black-necked swan video that only channel members will be able to access. If a monthly commitment like channel membership doesn't feel good for you but you'd still like to help, you can also visit my website, again, www.ravenlightholistic.healing.com, for instructions on how to provide a one-time financial gift. Also, and oh my God, so much pre-video stuff. Thank you guys for your patience. Don't forget, if you want to be notified anytime I make a new video or community post, it's not enough to just click subscribe. You also have to click that little bell icon next to the subscribe button and click all. Otherwise, YouTube will choose which of my videos or posts it thinks you want to see, and that really could be none of them. So, finally, Swan, thank you for sticking around. I originally began this script with Swan's hunger for a soulmate, as this is a very big deal for the Swan person, and we're definitely going to talk about this. But what really defines a Swan person as an individual is their idealism and devotion to perfection and beauty. Swans are sacred to Venus, the goddess of beauty, and love and sex, but again, we'll get to that later. If I had to make an astrological association here, I would definitely mention Virgo, with its obsession with perfection and purity, and Libra, ruled by Venus, who does not like ugliness and will resist seeing it in themselves and others, and who wants to bring perfect harmony to its environment. Leo, too, gets a place here with its desire for everything to be of the best quality that can possibly be, worthy of a king or queen. Most of the Swan people that I know have strong Virgo, Libra, and or Leo placements, or at least two planets in the related houses. Now, there are a few different things that create the aforementioned emotional patterns. First, the swan's color. We associate white with perfection, purity, holiness. It's the color of heaven, of divine beauty and oneness, of perfect spiritual attainment. For Swan people, beauty is the ultimate manifestation of holiness and the divine, and they feel inherently moved to bring beauty into the world, whether this is through the way they dress or dance, the art or music or writing that they create, or the way in which they decorate their homes. Any kind of ugliness is very hard for them to bear and will annoy the heck out of them. They need their environments to be orderly, that would be Virgo, and harmonious, Libra, with a place for everything and no useless clutter. Everything that has a place in a Swan person's home is going to be carefully chosen and meet their high aesthetic standards. At least this is the goal. One of Virgo's big issues is that it can be so obsessed with things being perfectly clean and perfectly orderly that it makes the job of organizing everything into a monumental task that no mere mortal could manage. So instead of taking things one step at a time until the whole house is beautiful and sparkling, it allows the mess to grow worse and worse and worse, all the while judging itself for failing to be a better housekeeper. The hallmark of a Virgo tends to either be toilets so clean you could drink out of them, or there's so much dirty laundry lying about you can't see the floor. And sometimes this happens in the same house. Swan people, and Virgos, often need to make a major effort to recognize when they are refraining from taking action on something, anything, because their standards for perfection are so high that they've made the process far more work than it has to be. They then need to make the decision to let go of their attachment to a perfect outcome and just take the task step by step, doing what feels joyful rather than what feels forced. It's really the only way they can get anything done. Which brings me to my next point: relentless self-judgment and self-criticism in an effort to be perfect. Swan people are consummate perfectionists. They have extremely high standards for the beauty of their environment and are hard on themselves about their appearance when they don't feel beautiful. But they also have expectations for perfection in every other area of their lives, most especially their behavior. Swan people are relentlessly preoccupied with their personal sins. In some cases, we are talking about classic biblical sins, and these folks can drive themselves absolutely crazy trying to adhere to their particular faith's scriptural rules. In other cases, the sins with which they are concerned aren't biblical so much as violations of a list of excruciating standards for what it means to be a good or worthy human being in their eyes. And Swan people have a lot of things that they think they must do in order to be good. It's a very rough way to live, always, always, always judging themselves for something. And this is really the road to bitterness. When we don't let ourselves be happy with ourselves unless we are perfect in our own eyes, and then we see those who are also failing to live up to our standards getting what we want, this seems massively unfair, and boom, instant judgy McJudgerson. Swan people can become obsessed with what others are doing and getting because it doesn't fit with their belief about how things work. If perfection is the path to happiness, and those people are happy without being perfect, what the heck is going on? It makes things seem awfully hopeless for the Swan person. The surest indicator that a Swan person has gotten off track in their journey is that they are obsessed with what others have or others are doing rather than focusing on themselves. When they notice themselves doing this, they really need to begin looking inward. Ultimately, when we don't have what we want, and this is upsetting, it's because we feel like we are powerless. Either we perceive our lack as sheer bad luck we are unable to change, as being due to an inherent shortcoming in ourselves that we aren't able to improve. Or somehow maybe we're just not being good enough to please God, and God is denying us. An empowered individual knows that while the divine certainly withholds things from our grasp from time to time, this occurs only when it actually serves us. Otherwise, the person standing in the way of us getting what we want is us, usually in the form of a limiting belief about what has to happen for us to get what we want. And again, Swan's standards for what needs to occur for them to be worthy of happiness are extremely high. What therefore needs to change is not the Swan person themselves. They don't need to flagellate themselves into being better. They need to believe that they're worthy of good things now, whether they are perfect or the farthest thing from. When we let go of the notion that good things only arrive when we check a prescribed set of boxes, good things begin arriving no matter where we are in our personal journey. One of the other things that creates an emphasis on judgment of self and others is the swan's long, graceful neck. That neck, in large part, defines a swan. Without it, we would be hard-pressed to call it a swan. The neck and throat are where we most often hold feelings of judgment and anger, including judging self and judging others. But it's also where we can choose to embody mercy. In other words, do we obsess over perceived flaws and endlessly seek to manage them? Or do we accept that we are doing the best that can be done with the information and tools that we have and shower ourselves with love and encouragement and praise? You can answer that question for yourself right now. Who lives in your brain? A tyrant who always tells you how you're screwing up and could do better? Or an angel who encourages and soothes you when you're afraid you're falling short? Swan people have to really, really work to depose that tyrant. And this is a tall order for them because the throat is where we tend to hold emotions that we're frightened to feel. The throat is the channel between the heart, where feelings first begin, and the mind, where they're acknowledged and understood and ultimately surrendered. And look at what a long distance the swan person's emotions have to travel to make it to the point at which they can be understood and dealt with. Swan people have to just sit and feel their emotions for much longer than most other people before they begin to understand why they feel what they do and what needs to happen to make things better for themselves. This is really maddening for them, particularly because they have a lot of emotions that confuse the heck out of them and around which they won't gain clarity without a heaping dose of self-discipline. Instead of analyzing what they feel or distracting themselves, something at which they excel, they need to channel some of the confidence and wisdom of a water bird to remember that it is safe to just be in those emotions, to float in the middle of that lake of feelings, even if they can't see the bottom, and know they won't drown. In metaphysical terms, water and emotion are one. When we feel our emotions, instead of analyzing them, trying to make them into something else, or telling ourselves we shouldn't have them for any reason, we not only gain understanding of why we felt what we did, but the emotions themselves begin to dissolve. Even the things that traumatized us, that we thought destroyed us, lose their power. And we gain the ability to live as the healthy, happy, empowered people we came here to become, rather than broken shadows of ourselves. And guys, I'm speaking from experience here. Feeling through some massive traumas healed me mentally, physically, and emotionally, and is what allowed me to create the life that makes me so happy. Trying to think myself into a happier place, something I was pretty good at, made me very, very ill. I just got sicker and sicker. But feeling, just feeling, set me free. When the swan person refuses to feel, the only tool in their arsenal will tend to be self-criticism. They'll just keep trying to berate themselves into being better in the same old ways, rather than dealing with the issue at its core, the limiting belief that makes them think they need to be better in the first place. The neck and throat are significant for the swan person in another way. Of the 7 swan species, 4 are named for a sound or lack thereof. The mute swan, trumpeter swan, whooper swan, and whistling swan, though in the case of the whistling swan, the noise is made by the flapping of its wings rather than with its vocal cords. Further, according to legend, swans are voiceless until the end of their lives, when they sing with heart-rending sadness and beauty just before they die. This was proven false centuries ago, but it continues to appear in literature. For this reason, we refer to someone's final public performance of a professional activity as a swan song. Swan people often don't blossom creatively until later in life. Being profoundly creative is one of the graces of being a water creature, as water is also the element of dreams, imagination, and creativity. The throat chakra is also where we finally express our creativity, where we speak it into being. But true creativity is the ultimate unguarded representation of self. And here again, swan people have murderously high standards, fearing that the products of their imagination are unholy or unworthy or just plain not good enough. Many of them spend a good portion of their adult lives being quite confident in their physical beauty or power. The swan, after all, is best loved for its beauty, and it is respected for its size and strength. But they're certain that their creative passions, the ones that lie within them and are screaming to get out, would be judged inferior. Thus, they will tend to keep that part of themselves hidden, or they'll dabble in it, but never follow through sufficiently to finish anything of real meaning to them, and they'll feel desperately incomplete. It's important to note here that the soulmate that swan people crave cannot feed their souls when the root of starvation is a lack of authentic creative fulfillment. Swan people can destroy a really good relationship, making increasing demands of their soulmate to make them feel better about themselves, when the heart of the issue is their own inability to authentically be themselves creatively. They won't let themselves be loved for the most sacred pieces of who they really are, so no amount of love for who they are not will fulfill them. The other thing that can happen when they cannot get themselves to create is that they will pour all of that unchanneled passion into something else, often into their physical beings. So they're used to the notion that beauty and power equal admiration and attention, something they long to receive for their creative works. So they may become obsessive about enhancing or maintaining their physical strength or appearance. If they're still doing this when they get older, aging can be absolutely devastating for them. Unable to hold on to the youthful beauty they believed was key to being loved and respected, and yet unable to create, the prospect of moving into their senior years can be terrifying. However, they are intended to blossom, and they can with determination. When they commit to feeling through all the judgments and limiting beliefs that they've heaped upon their creative efforts, one day they will finally have enough courage and motivation to get their creations out there, knowing that they're going to touch a lot of people on a visceral level. Swan has a lot of numerological 11 energy to it, and folks with 11 in their numerological chart often create works that touch people in such profoundly deep ways that those people aren't even able to put the experience into words. Their creativity touches the soul. It's a tremendous gift. Now, everything in our lives works together to create the challenges we are intended to experience in each lifetime. One of the things the swan person came here to do was to learn to stop criticizing themselves and see how beautiful and worthy they are just because they are them. No matter how they look, how many mistakes they believe they've made, or how they feel they have fallen short of any other standard by which they judge themselves. We best learn through experience, and so as young people, life will tend to set them up in a way that creates the opposite belief system. Swan people tend to feel awfully persecuted as young people. We can turn to literature for this one, Hans Christian Andersen's The Ugly Duckling being our foremost example. A goodly number of swan people have had the experience of a parent or siblings outright telling them that they were in some way ugly, physically or otherwise. And these folks are the ones that can get really obsessive about their physical appearance because in youth they came to believe that being loved was dependent upon one's beauty. If they weren't made to feel ugly, they were ignored or excluded or made to feel undeserving of love and acceptance, and in dramatically painful ways. And I'm just realizing I'm filming this in the middle of the crazy cicada season here in the Midwest. So if you guys are hearing what sounds like electrical wires shrilling, it's the bazillion cicadas in my backyard. Anyway, so when our belief is that we are ugly or unworthy of love and acceptance, we tend to attract experiences over and over again that show us that there's something inherently unworthy in us and that we are therefore unable to be consistently loved or have our needs met. And so Swan people tend to feel that life in general is quite unfair and that they're being persecuted without understanding why. As much criticism as they heap upon themselves, part of them really does know that they are good people, and they don't understand why they are being victimized when other people seem to have it so good. There are numerous myths and folk stories of innocent, kind, and beautiful people being turned into swans, a form in which they're usually admired for their beauty and grace, but are denied the lives they really want. Odette of Swan Lake is cursed to become a swan by an evil sorcerer. The children of Lear, who are turned into swans by their jealous stepmother, are doomed to remain swans for 900 years, 300 of which are spent isolated from each other and enduring terrible storms. In the stories The Wild Swans and The Six Swans, a girl's brothers are turned into swans. Again, that jealous stepmother is up to no good, and must wait many long years while the sister completes a seemingly impossible task and endures no small amount of suffering herself before they regain their human forms. In the Trois Sisters, a girl is drowned by her jealous sister, only to become a swan whose body is then turned into a harp that sings the truth of her murder. In each of these tales, true love beyond their imaginings or an equally incredible outcome is the reward for their long years of suffering, imprisonment in a foreign form, and isolation. Odette and her prince, who is of course her soulmate, are together forever, the evil sorcerer dead. The children of Lear, after 900 years as swans, go almost directly to heaven. The devoted sister of the Wild Swans and the Six Swans lives happily ever after with her prince, while in most cases her newly freed brothers also move into the kingdom and live happily. As an added bonus, the deplorable stepmother is inevitably executed, satisfying the swan desire for justice. Remember how earlier I mentioned that swan people have a lot of Libra qualities? A preoccupation with fairness and justice is one of them. In the Trois Sisters, the murdered sister usually comes back to life, marries the boy her sister attempted to steal from her, and the sister is either horrendously punished or sent away, depending on the tale. The girl is then reunited with the rest of her family and lives happily ever after. Hans Christian Andersen's The Ugly Duckling, however, serves as the most eloquent example of reward after long years of suffering. Mistakenly born into a family of ducks, the cygnet, who looks nothing like his brothers and sisters, is bullied, berated, and utterly convinced of his ugliness. After years and years of heartbreaking encounters that only confirm his undesirable status, the cygnet at last stumbles upon others of his own kind and is shocked to discover that not only is he beautiful, but that he's adored, at which point, quote, "He now felt glad at having suffered sorrow and trouble because it enabled him to so much better enjoy all the pleasure and happiness around him." And here we come to the crux of it all. Beyond the interpersonal love of a soulmate that we'll go into next, swans symbolize universal love. Remember that the swan's white color is tied to the divine, God, and the faith and experience required to have a genuine relationship with God. Add to that the fact that the swan's wings are the same as those most often associated with angels, and the swan is no less a symbol than the highest form of love, the unconditional love of the universe of which all things in existence are a part and serve a purpose. It's the same force that is always guiding us, always encouraging us towards the light, and towards becoming the highest possible manifestation of our true selves. Love is so much more than being there for someone, or great sex, or doing one's duty. It's more than unflinching loyalty, or adoration, or worship. It's seeing others for who they are, recognizing their divinity no matter how badly they've been broken or how they behave, and genuinely wanting those others to discover that divinity for themselves, to find their own fulfillment and happiness. Anything less is not actually love. It's needing the other person to be something for us. Swan people can be some of the most profoundly loving, truly spiritual beacons of light and wisdom and healing on the planet. But they first have to let go of the idea that they are in some way being victimized and instead accept that there are valuable lessons to be learned in suffering, the most important of which is to learn how to love. It is hard, understandably so, to believe that suffering could be part of a divine plan. And I'm often asked why the universe would put us through so much hell if it's actually a loving place. The simplest answer I can give here is that nothing else will get us to break the thought and behavior patterns that don't serve us. If we are uncomfortable, it's often not enough. We can do discomfort. But when we are in real, lasting pain, we will do just about anything to make that pain stop, including facing those things within ourselves that scare or shame us, and letting go of beliefs we have about the world that limit instead of liberate us. This is where, if we are brave, we meet God, where we discover that the universe really was designed to facilitate joy. And when we learn this, we naturally become sources of radiant light. How not when you now know that your birthright and that of others is to be happy? 2, the most loving, compassionate people were not born that way. They were at one point most often the ones in need of compassion, particularly from themselves. Our beacons of light usually spent the greatest amount of time in profound darkness. So if swan people are here to channel divine love, they usually need to go through hell themselves, and they often feel achingly alone during these times. This is because we only really tend to encounter the divine and heal ourselves when the only person on whom we have to rely is ourselves, and all external distractions are removed. Think of the rewards of the swan stories I just mentioned. True love, real love, happily ever afters, heaven. Have faith and endure. Seek out all the things within yourselves that are not loving and merciful, and work diligently to heal them, and your good will come. And having come to this place yourself, you're going to be able to light the way for others. So, at last, let's talk about the all-important swan-person relationship, starting with the way in which swans behave as mated pairs in the wild. Unlike the majority of birds, who pair for a single breeding season and then go their separate ways, swans tend to mate for life. Scientists have recently discovered that they do cheat and they do divorce, though the latter usually only occurs when there's been a singularly bad breeding season. Most species of swans are extremely territorial year-round, those that are more social becoming fiercely territorial during the mating season, and together with their partners, they will aggressively defend their space against other swans and water birds, kayakers, humans, and even young children. Mute swans, the classic all-white swan and representation of love with which we are all most familiar, first arrived in America in the mid-1800s when they were sent from Europe to serve as ornamentation for large estates, city parks, and zoos, and this continued until the early 1900s. As often happens with a plant or critter sent someplace because it's pretty, troubles ensued. As it turns out, each swan can rip out up to 8 pounds of waterweed per day. The waterweed's what it really likes to eat. Far more than it will actually eat, and far faster than it can regrow, rapidly making a water ecosystem inhospitable for organisms that need to live in that waterweed, as well as for those other animals for whom it's also a food source. Their aggressive defense of their territory also threatens tourism centered around waterways. So in many locations around the world, they're being culled. In pairs, swans are a force to be reckoned with. At least where the females are concerned, paired swans are healthier as well. Swans spend a great deal of time patrolling their territory and fighting off other swans, especially as male swans will kill the cygnets belonging to other males when he can. This means that it is a tremendous strain for an unpaired female to protect her nest and the territory in which it is located, so it's to her advantage to have a mate. When she's part of a pairing, she's also considerably bolder. Knowing that there's someone there to back her up helps her feel more confident defending her nests if she needs to. Additionally, unlike most other waterfowl, male swans often help incubate the eggs so that the female can concentrate on eating enough to regain the fat stores that were depleted in laying them. Once the eggs hatch, the male spends a great deal of time protecting and teaching them, and also lets them ride on his back. Swan pairs are a tightly bonded team, and even when not necessary for the sake of creating more offspring, they engage in a lot of sex. A lot. Most ornithologists believe that this kind of frequent intimacy helps maintain such an enduring pair bond. So, for these reasons, swans have come to symbolize romantic love and devotion, an association further enhanced by the courtship ritual of the mute swan, in which the pair faces each other with ruffled feathers and lifted wings, bowing gracefully so that their curved necks each form half of a perfect heart. The swans you tend to see as wedding cake toppers are mute swans. If you're a swan person, finding a soulmate, and it has to be a soulmate, nothing less is going to do here, is of primary importance to you, and you find it difficult to be truly happy on your own. This is another way in which swans show some significant Libra energy. Some part of you is always hungering for your other half, and so in your mind, while you may not need or even want to do everything with a partner, everything feels better if you have the option to do it with a partner. At the end of the day, the longevity of swan pairings are actually about the success of raising children. But while being married to someone who's a good mother or father will tend to be enough to keep the swan person in the marriage no matter what, it takes quite a lot for a swan person to be happy in the marriage. Remember how swan people are idealists with high standards for everything in their world? This definitely extends to their romantic relationships. So what does this look like? First, swan people are more attached to their mate being fit and beautiful than a lot of other folks, and not being physically attracted to someone will tend to be a total deal breaker. At least when they are still of childbearing age, their mate will also need to want children, though these children may be a particularly fortunate handful of pets, and be excellent parents who will give the swan person plenty of time off to take care of their own needs. An exception here is if they have a shared creative interest, a project or hobby into which both mates pool their time and energy, and which represents a tremendous passion for them both, something they can generate, birth, and nurture together. As a swan person, you're also going to want your partner to spend a lot of time with you, so you won't be happy with a workaholic who puts their job first or needs to travel all the time for work. When we talk about creatures with a voracious appetite like swan, we're talking about people who hunger for nourishment of all kinds, who need constant stimulation and learning and entertainment. And they don't just want someone who's going to foot the bill for all their interests. They want someone who's also going to want to know about life and its mysteries, to experience it in visceral ways. This is probably one of the most critical aspects of swan-person relationships. Their mate has to be both interesting and interested in more than a mundane existence. Anyone less is just not going to be able to keep up and may in fact feel completely sucked dry by the swan person's constant need for the new. Now, male swans are ultimately protectors in the relationship, but the female will step up as needed and can be quite dangerous herself. If you're female or identify as female, you'll want a strong mate capable of protecting you, physically if necessary, but who will never treat you as anything less than an equal. If you're male or identify as male, your mate needs to allow you to protect them, while not being a shrinking violet either. Mates should be comfortable in a position of shared strength, but not dominate the marriage. Because swans really want a space that is all theirs, a castle unto themselves, And the same is true for Swan people. Any potential mates still living in their parents' basement or who think that you should keep living there after you're married need not apply. And most importantly, the sex better be good and it better be frequent. It tends to really surprise those whose natures are inherently sexual that there are a lot of people who could quite happily be in a sexless marriage. Somewhere out there, I guarantee you, a Scorpio just went, "I don't believe that for a second," and a Leo said, "Exactly, total BS." But for some signs, physical intimacy just isn't important so long as other criteria are met, such as shared hobbies or interests. Telling a Swan person that you're just not that interested in sex is usually a deal breaker. Sex and or frequent physical contact are often the most important part of the marriage. But these physical expressions are about reaffirming the relationship, about connection, which is very different from their being about the physical sensations or excitement. There's another relationship factor critical to being a Swan person, regardless of male or female orientation, and that is romanticism. Swans really love grand romantic rituals. It's not just sex, for example. It's like we're having sex for the first time ever, and it is transcendent. The mating ritual of mute swans really is a ritual. Swans don't just jump into bed, as it were. They align their bodies nearly side by side, begin dipping their heads in the water and preening themselves, moving faster and faster, closer and closer, and increasing eye contact until they are often moving in perfect harmony as they bow to each other. Eventually, their necks will begin to intertwine, and then one swan will drape its neck over their partner's. Then they're ready to go to bed. After the actual act, there's more looking into each other's eyes and preening, and then they will go about their daily business while staying near each other. They do this whole thing a lot, even when it's not necessary for having kids. There's even a ritual for trading off egg incubation duties, with lots of feather fluffing and wing raising to each other, a bit of rumbling and preening, and then the bird leaving the nest adds a bit more nesting material to the pile and then paddles off to eat and patrol the territory. What this can translate into for Swan people is being a bit, shall we say, high maintenance in the physical intimacy department. The best example I have here is from one of my clients whose husband was a Swan person. He described his husband as wanting every sexual experience to be straight out of a romance novel. Passionate, vigorous, possessive, and tender all at once. And of course, meaningful. There would be no turning over to go to sleep afterwards. His husband wanted to cuddle and exchange gentle banter. My client, who is often exhausted from a long day at work and would have been quite happy with a casual quickie up against the kitchen wall, oh horrors, was going out of his mind. There may also be an attachment to being continually shown how special the relationship is. The Swan person may expect gifts or special outings, frequent massages, or other concrete displays of love. This reaffirms their trust that you love them, that you see them as number one. It's very much a Leo sort of energy, and a lot of Swan people have strong Leo or fifth house placements in their astrological charts. These folks really need to be treated like kings or queens. But here's the thing. If you treat your Swan person as though they are the sun, moon, and stars, you can bet they are going to return your demonstrations with interest. Swan people don't want to be special in isolation. They want to be special together, to be this beautiful, regal, madly in love, ever-evolving twosome existing in their own private magical space. Think about the Swan pair valiantly defending their little corner of the world in which they will dine and nest and raise a family and enjoy the beauty of the world. Swan people aren't big on large friendship groups. They may have one, maybe two good friends, but all they actually want is that soulmate, that one special someone. If they have that, they think they don't need anything else or anyone else. The thing is, this is an awfully big ask for their partner to be their everything. You're their cheerleader, counselor, sexual partner, conversation partner, source of new experiences. Not everyone's cut out for this. But if you are willing and able to put in the time and energy to take care of your Swan partner in the ways that matter to them, and if you are as interested in life and learning as they are, you can't ask for a better mate. They will be love and affection and fabulous sex incarnate, and you'll have incredible philosophical conversations together about everything and anything. A final element of the swan tendency to romanticize. This can make them very hard to please in other areas as well, because they tend to see everything in terms of how grand and beautiful it could be, or how much more sophisticated and magical. And they don't understand why everyone else doesn't see this as well and doesn't want to put in the effort to make it that way. Because most things we see day in and day out are not works of perfection, they can be chronically disappointed. Swan people often need to accept that most people are just not as attached to perfect beauty and sophistication as they are. And if they find themselves ruminating about how mundane everything seems, they either need to A, take action themselves to add beauty to the area of life that they find lacking instead of just complaining about it, or B, let it go. Otherwise, they can find themselves continuously griping, and this prevents them from enjoying what beauty there is. Now, earlier I mentioned that at the end of the day, swan relationships are about the children. Baby swans stay with their parents for much longer than most other birds, meaning that the parents really need to know what they're doing. The longer they practice, the better they become at parenting each new batch of babies. Having to start over with a new mate each time, a mate who may be far less experienced than you are, would mean a lesser chance of healthy, happy cygnets. 2, the next swan in line may not be a good breeder. They might have a genetic abnormality that creates weak or dysfunctional babies, or fewer of them. When a swan finds a good breeder, they want to stick with them and get better and better at making and raising those babies. But this doesn't usually happen straight out the gate. Swans change mates frequently until they find one worth staying with. But once they've found him or her, bang, that's it. For obvious reasons, swan people value loyalty. And yet, as we just talked about, these are deeply sexual individuals with a craving for adoration and special experiences. Their lives have to be rich in physical affection, beauty, and love in order for them to be happy. And this can be a recipe for infidelity, but they won't see it that way, and it will be almost impossible for you to get them to confess to it, even if you catch them in the act. To the swan person, loyalty to their mate and the well-being of their children is priority number 1. And so long as their mate is being a good, attentive parent, there is almost nothing that would cause them to ask for a divorce. In their minds, the lifelong bond that they share with you as the parent of their children is so much more important than a little sex on the side. And since they're staying in the marriage and they're doing their part to support the kiddos, whatever that is, they don't actually consider it cheating. They're just doing what they need to do to keep themselves happy. 2, the way in which swan people romanticize much of their lives does extend to themselves as well. They see themselves as loyal partners worthy of your loyalty in turn. The idea of themselves as a cheater doesn't compute, and they will rationalize 6 ways from Sunday to keep it that way. Nor does the idea of a broken marriage fit their ideal public image, another Libra and sometimes Leo preoccupation. They may stay in the marriage just so they don't have to endure the embarrassment of a divorce. This is one of the reasons that it is absolutely critical for swan people to give a relationship time before marrying their partner and having children with them. Otherwise, they may wind up staying with someone just because they have children with them and seeking satisfaction on the side. While they may not be willing to recognize this behavior as infidelity, their partners certainly will, and you guys know, partners always find out. And there's a good chance the swan person will end up holding divorce papers. This can be absolutely devastating for them. Far better instead that they take the time to ensure that their romantic partner is going to be more than just a great parent, that they'll be a great mate for them too. When will a swan person take the initiative and divorce you first? Well, if you don't have children together, a lack of sexual satisfaction, physical affection, adoration, or simply being there with them should be cause for concern, because they will tend to leave you when they find someone who will give them those things. If you do have children, it's likely to happen if the above criteria are met and you fail as a parent in their eyes. If you're no longer providing financially for the spouse and children, if that's your stake in the marriage, or if you just aren't being there to take care of the kids, divorce papers shouldn't shock you. Now, I know a lot of single swan people who, even though they're desperately lonely, have such high standards for what they believe they need from a partner that they can't connect with anyone at all. And so as ironic as it may seem for a critter that symbolizes love, there are a lot of lonely swan folks out there. But this isn't usually because their standards are too high. Rather, it's because they don't believe that they themselves are on par with what they want. They don't think that they are perfect enough or worthy enough for the perfect guy or gal. So long as they do this, what they are putting out into the universe is, I need a person who meets my ideals, and I won't accept anything else, but I myself don't deserve that person. Since the universe usually gives us experiences that reflect our beliefs pretty exactly, the swan person will tend to receive continued affirmation from various sources that nope, they are not going to get to have what they want or who they want. It's usually not until they let go of this idea that they must in some way be perfect or more worthy in order to connect with a mate with whom they can be deliriously happy that the universe will give them a new romantic relationship. Again, it's not about becoming perfect swan people or even becoming better. It's about letting go of the belief that you have to be better before you can receive what you believe will make you happy. So I hope this has given you guys a good idea of what it means to be a swan person. And don't forget to look for Swan as a Spirit Guide coming soon. Remember that if there's a video you want to see, become a channel member at the 2nd or 3rd tier, and your requests will be added to the official video request list from which I draw possibilities for the next video. When I'm ready to make a new video, I'll pick 3 animals from the request list. 3rd tier members will get to vote for the one that they want, and that's the video I'll make next. Right now I'm working on Blue Jay, which was requested and voted on by members. Also, don't forget, if you can't see the join button, just go to the video description, which is probably below but might be to the right, and look for the link to the page on my website that gives device-specific directions for making the join button visible. Again, I promise it's really quick and easy, and I even give you directions for putting it back the other way when you're done. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Cheers!